He was right there. For some reason he wasn't coming out. I had to actually start holding back from pushing as best as I could, which was incredibly difficult. Hey guys, so I'm Danica and I am going to tell you my birth story of my fourth baby, and I might be a little shaky for a second because my washer is running. It's finishing its cycle and I'm in our fifth wheel, and so it's really shaky. So this is my baby boy. His name is Woods Ellis and he is 7 weeks old now. So I wanted to kind of take you guys through this. As somebody who loves home birth and has had a home birth before and loved it, I loved being home and being able to get right into my bed afterwards. I was very much excited for a home birth in our fifth wheel, and we had it all set up and everything, but it actually didn't end up being a home birth. And just to kind of give a little bit of a overview of my births. So I have 4 children and I've had 2 natural births and 2 C-sections. So my first birth was in the hospital. That labor actually was induced with Pitocin, and that was before I was kind of diving into holistic health. I was more natural minded. I really wanted to have my baby without an epidural, but at the time, it was almost 9 years ago, my reasoning was more because I wanted to experience birth the way that my body was intended to give birth. And then I went into the hospital one day to get checked, and then it just led to the cascade of interventions, which luckily was just Pitocin, which I allowed them to administer to me. And then I was able to give birth to her fairly smoothly, and it was a pretty good labor besides just the tug of war with nurses and anesthesiologists and just telling them I didn't need all these things they wanted to give me. I ended up giving birth to her without an epidural, and it was a beautiful birth besides the environment I was in. And then my second baby ended up being a C-section, and I actually never really understood what happened. I had this perfect labor at home, and then our plan was to have her in it was called the birthing center of this hospital that's somewhat local to us. It's over the state line where we used to live. And so I labored at home until my water broke. Like, I start kind of feeling pushy, and then I push, my water breaks, and then it's time to just full on push. So my second daughter, that happened. I labored at home in our guest room while my husband and our first daughter were sleeping because it was really late at night, and I was just like in the zone. And then I went to the bathroom, I pushed, my water broke, and then I realized, oh, we got to go to the hospital where we had our birth planned. My husband and I drove there together. My sister was home with our daughter, and I ended up pushing all night long. And so this was my second daughter, and so I don't know how far into detail I should go because I want to get to Woods' birth story, but that's something I can definitely go into towards the end of the video after I talk through what kind of happened. But it does matter for his story too. So my second daughter, she ended up just unable to descend, and I ended up pushing all night and until I was black and blue in the face from pushing so hard. I was swollen and puffy, and then she came out with a bruised head and a big bump on the top of her head, and I had some reasons that I thought that had happened, and so a lot of it I kind of blamed myself and the system I was in. But with his birth, I now have a little bit more perspective on what happened, I think. My third daughter, actually, so my last birth before him, she was like just my dream birth at home, and it was at the last place that we lived before we were living in the fifth wheel, and it was a quick and easy labor. She came right out. She was healthy. It's just like exactly what I wanted. So this time, that's what my plan was. I wanted it to go pretty much the same as my previous baby. And so we planned our home birth and had my midwife that she actually was one of the midwives I worked with my previous baby, and she had started her own practice in the last few years, so had her as our midwife this time. And it was such an uneventful pregnancy. I didn't have anything really come up where it was like something we had to worry about. And I ended up going past 40 weeks, past 41 weeks, and then I was just coming up to 42 weeks. And here in the state that I live in, the midwife can't attend your home birth if you're after 42 weeks. It was kind of creeping up. I didn't want to do anything to induce labor. I was at this point of, I want my body to naturally go into labor. I want my body to do what it needs to do, and my baby to grow to the point where the baby needs to grow. And I also want my midwife to be there, and I also don't want to have to just go straight into the hospital or make that choice of what I'm going to do without my midwife. I think it was like a few days before 42 weeks, and I had a midwife appointment that morning. It was a Thursday, so that Thursday morning I went in and she took my blood pressure right away, and it was a little bit higher than she'd like to see. We made a plan for her to come over to the fifth wheel that night because she lives just up the road, and luckily she's been able to just stop by here so many times on her way home, and that's been my appointment. That's been so nice. So she made the plan to stop by. She wanted to check my blood pressure and check the baby's heartbeat one more time, and so she had a dinner thing to go to, and she came after that. I think it was about 7:30 or 8 maybe. We had just started putting the kids to bed. So at my earlier appointment in the morning, she asked me if I wanted the midwife's smoothie drink that had the castor oil, almond butter, lemon verbena, and then she said just pick up apricot juice or something like that. Time just kept going by and nothing was happening. So I asked her if she would just bring it to my house that evening, and I would have it on hand just in case. And then I called around to a bunch of acupuncture places to see if anybody had a last minute appointment. Somebody called me back, and I was able to make an appointment for that next day, Friday at noon. So my plan was go to the acupuncture appointment, and then if that doesn't kickstart things, then maybe later in the afternoon I would take the midwife smoothie. So she came over that Thursday night, and I was praying before she got there. I was just like praying that I would go into labor before 42 weeks and that I'd be able to have my midwife there with me. So she came, she checked me, things looked good. My blood pressure was fine, the baby's heart rate sounded good, and she was walking out. As soon as she started walking down the stairs, I got this really strong contraction. I just started to consistently have contractions, and they were strong, and like immediately it was like right into labor. So I texted her, I gave her a heads up. I texted my photographer and said I'm just gonna get my house ready and rest and just get through this first easy part. So that's exactly what we did. My husband and I finished putting the girls to bed. We started rearranging the house because I had a birth pool to put in one of the slide outs where our little love seat is. So we moved the love seat, we put the birth pool in the slide out, or it's not a slide out, it's just like a bump out area. And it just fit perfectly. You guys will have to see that because we're in an RV, so we didn't have space for a huge round birth pool. So we found this cold plunge pool at Costco, and it worked so perfectly. It was kind of a oval shape, so it just fit tucked in out of the way. I just did some cleaning, turned the lights down, got some candles on, husband turned the music, and yeah, and so things started to pick up. So I came up to my bedroom, turned my red light on. I had one of those big exercise bouncy balls up here, and I was just bouncing and holding on to like the edge of the bed and just in the zone. Like things were going great. So that was from about, yeah, I guess 8:30 p.m. January 9th until around 12:30 a.m., midnight, 12:30, things got really intense and picked up, and I wanted to get in bed and just like lay down. Luckily, my husband called the midwife and the photographer and told them things were getting really intense, because I have a tendency to keep pushing through because I don't want people waiting around or anything. And then it's like, oh, things are really happening now. We're trying to get everybody here last second. So either I told my husband things were getting intense or he just knew. But anyways, he called them, and I had been in bed for a little bit. I ended up wrapping a towel around my body pillow, and I was just kind of straddling my body pillow but on the side. And eventually I just started getting that urge to bear down a little bit. Not like I needed to push my baby out, but just like stronger contractions, and I knew my water was about to break. And so I was laying right here on the end of the bed facing that way, and my plan was, as soon as my water broke, I was gonna roll out of bed so I could try to avoid the water getting everywhere. And so that's what I did. Had one of those good strong contractions. My water broke so intensely, and as soon as that contraction was kind of through, I rolled over and off the bed. It was amazing. I started patting around because I wanted to see if my husband needed to change the sheets, and there was water on nothing. It only got on the towel that was wrapped around my body pillow. So I had gotten out of bed and started having more strong contractions, and my midwife showed up right after my water broke. So she just went right to town getting her stuff set up out in our kitchen area, and they just kind of left me alone for a little bit. And our photographer showed up. I guess she had a hard time finding our place because we're kind of on a really dark road and it's hard to see it at night. So it's like 1:30 in the morning at this point, and everybody's kind of coming in. And so yeah, I made my way to the birth pool, and I just was in the zone, and I was just pushing at that point. So my birth video doesn't really have any leading up to footage. So I was in the birth pool pushing, and I just immediately started getting into the position that I pushed my previous daughter, our third daughter, out in, and that was kind of sitting on my bum and nothing's really happening. I think I was in the birth pool for maybe, I don't know how long. It was for a while. But my midwife, because I've had a C-section before, she has to watch the time that I'm pushing for. And so yeah, there was a certain point where she's like, why don't you get out of the tub? Because I had tried a whole bunch of different things in the tub and just things weren't happening. So if I got out, I could try a few different positions and she could kind of see what was going on. So I got out, and I think I did some squatty things for a little bit, and then she had me try the runner's lunge position. You're down on all fours and you put a foot and knee up, and she could see him right there. She could feel his head. It was right there. It was like a half an inch in, and when I felt in there, I couldn't tell it was his head. It was so squishy. She could feel it, and so it's just kind of weird how he wasn't just like popping right out after all this pushing. And I've been able to push 2 babies out really smoothly and easily. So I just kept trying. I tried different things. I did try laying on my back. I tried standing up. I tried that seated curl position. I was really trying to open up my pelvic floor, and just there was a point where I pushed so hard I felt my hip bones spread apart, and I was like, okay, I can do this. But after that point I couldn't do that anymore, and it's probably good that I wasn't able to and that I didn't, because it could have made it a lot harder later on. But he was lodged very deep down in my pelvis, and I had felt him very low for the last couple weeks of my pregnancy. Like, I knew he was very close, and so I expected for him to just slide right out because of how low and engaged his head was. And I had been doing all sorts of things to make sure that he was in the right position. I had been walking a lot. I had been sleeping in the left side position with my leg up. It's like part of the mile circuit. I'd been doing the mile circuit. Yeah, it just felt like he was in the perfect position to just easily come out. So that was just very weird. And so this brought up the memory of my second daughter's labor, because I pushed and pushed and pushed for 8+ hours at the hospital and tried all sorts of different positions, and I never could figure out why that happened. But she ended up coming out with a big bump on her head and an indent in her forehead. So during labor with him, while I'm trying to push, after a couple hours, I think it was coming up to 2 hours, a little bit more, because I started getting that urge to bear down before my water broke. So maybe almost 3 hours, maybe an hour and 45 minutes of like intense pushing. So my midwife was like, what are we gonna do? But he was right there. For some reason he wasn't coming out, and I'm thinking, this feels so familiar. This is what happened with my second daughter. My photographer said that, and I said that this feels really familiar. She just kind of chuckled to herself because she thought I meant being in labor in general. Like, this feels familiar. But what I was actually talking about was that what had happened with my second daughter, of her just being completely stuck. It wasn't shoulder dystocia or anything, but just completely stuck, and their head just lodged right there in my pelvic area. That's what I meant. And so after a little bit longer of trying, I just knew nothing I did was gonna have this baby come out. And I wanted to get over to the hospital so I could get some relief, because at this point I knew that I was causing him damage to his head, and I was pushing so hard, and my body was having that fetal ejection reflex where it was pushing so hard, and I had to actually start holding back from pushing as best as I could, which was incredibly difficult. And so it got to that point where it was just the most intense pushing, where my body was trying to just force this baby out that was stuck. The baby couldn't get through, but my body was working really hard to get the baby out. And then at the same time, I'm trying to hold back pushing because I didn't want to hurt his head or get so swollen like I did with my second daughter. My entire body got so swollen, it looked like I had been, my husband equates it to, you were deadlifting your max deadlift all night long. And so I had like bruising around my jawline, my face was swollen, my arms were swollen, I had broken blood vessels everywhere. My lips were purple. They were like bruised, and I saw my reflection in the doors of an elevator. It was like really shiny and reflective, and I didn't even recognize myself. I just didn't even look like myself. So I knew how aggressive this kind of pushing could be to both myself and the baby, and my midwife knew that too. So we both were like, okay, I gotta kind of hold back from these really intense pushes, knowing the baby's not coming out. And so we made a plan to go to the hospital, and it's about 20 minutes away. And luckily my sister was here. My 2 older daughters were awake, and my third daughter, she was fast asleep through the whole thing. And so my sister and my daughters were able to climb in bed. So I got my like sweatpants and my snow jacket and my snow boots on and waddled to the car. And my husband and I got in our van. My midwife called them ahead of time at the hospital to let them know that we were on our way there. My photographer came with us. They ended up letting her come through the whole process, but we drove to the hospital, and people keep asking me, was the drive terrible? It was hard, but knowing that I was on my way there to get out of this situation and to get the baby out and to get some relief from that really hard pushing, I was looking at it as like, okay, this is gonna end soon. So that was getting me through it, and having been here, it wouldn't have gone anywhere. I just knew we had to do it. So we get there. I mean, the baby's head wasn't out, so it's not like I couldn't walk or anything. So I'm able to walk in, and then they check us in. Every minute I'm having an incredibly intense contraction, and then maybe a minute break. The contractions felt so long. Felt like my body was like, no, we're gonna make this one the one that gets the baby out, and then it wouldn't. So they're checking us in and asking me all these questions, and then they're like, we have to do blood work before anything, and then they don't even have an anesthesiologist available. So we just had to wait, and apparently the one anesthesiologist that was there was in a C-section, so I couldn't even get any relief at that point. And so I'm just trying to hold back. I'm still having these pushing contractions, and it was just a lot of dread because I'd been in that position before. The night that I had my second daughter was the roughest night of my life. Not that I was gonna die, but it makes you think about all the women who either have lived in a different time or live in a different place where they don't have access to help if they need help. And so it just brings you to a place of facing life and death. And so I'm waiting and waiting and going through all the questions, and then finally an OB comes in. She's the C-section surgeon, and she starts asking me questions, and I guess she kind of was giving off the vibe that she just thought I just tried to have a home birth, and it was hard, so I wanted to come in and have an epidural. And she didn't know about my history with my second daughter, so we kind of talked through that, and yeah, I think she just kind of thought, oh, tried to have a home birth and just couldn't handle the pain or whatever. So I guess once she saw the intensity of the contractions, she actually called the on-call anesthesiologist and had him come in. So that sped it up a little bit. He eventually made it in there, I think within the half an hour, and I was able to get relief from that pushing. So that gave me a little bit of a break, and at that point, we all agreed that he wasn't coming out. So they got me all lined up to have a C-section because, yeah, he was just stuck. And so it turned out his head was too big to come through. So they got me in for the C-section, and my husband was able to come in, my photographer was able to come in. And that's where my midwife and her assistant had to say goodbye to us for that time being until we had like our postpartum checks. So we went back in for the C-section, and my husband and Victoria, the photographer, were able to come in, which was so awesome that they let Victoria come in because those photos are amazing. At that point, what I was thinking was I just want to hold my baby, and I was basically 42 weeks pregnant, and that labor was rough. That pushing was rough. I knew what I could go through with my second daughter experience. I knew that I could end up in that position, but the point where I was at was like, just please just get my baby out for me. So we're in the operating room, and they start the C-section, and they're shaking me all over the table because his head was lodged in my bones. So they were having a really hard time getting him out, even the C-section way. And I'm just shaking all over the table. My husband's holding my shoulders, and I just start puking over the side of the table. So he has a bag to catch my puke and like hold my shoulders so I'm not shaking too much. They finally get him out. They hold him up, and this is before we know if it's a girl or a boy, and there's a nurse standing kind of over me and my husband's shoulder behind us, and she goes, oh, she's so blonde, or something like that, and we couldn't see because there was that blue sheet in front of us. And the surgeon goes, he is so big. And so my husband and I had this roller coaster of emotions. We were happy either way, but we had to like go through this process of like thinking it's a girl, our fourth girl, and then realizing it's our first boy. He was 9 pounds 15 ounces, so he's just about 10 pounds, and super blonde. So he was our biggest baby, and our only blonde baby so far, and he looks just like my husband actually. And all of our daughters kind of looked like me. He was a little limp. They had to do some resuscitation to him. Oh, and so another thing about having gone in for the C-section was they had actually asked me, do you have any special requests for this C-section? And so one of the requests I thought of when I was still in that really hard pushing time was delayed cord clamping if possible. But then the other thing was that my C-section scar from my previous C-section really bothered me, and it was adhered to my insides. It was really tight. I had searing pain anytime I moved certain ways with the skin around the sides of my C-section scar. And so I had a lot of trauma around that scar too, just from that earlier C-section. I wasn't really able to accept what happened and why it happened, so I didn't ever want to touch it. It took a really long time for me to be able to start going anywhere near it. So I asked them to take a look at that and see if they could clean up some of the scar tissue and if it was adhered to the inside. And it's actually been amazing how much better the healing process this time has been. I think part of it is not only I accepted the fact that I needed to have the C-section to have him, but I accepted responsibility for it, and I made the final decision of yes, I need the C-section, and that I also got a lot more clarity on what happened with my first C-section that I had, and that her head got stuck too, and she wasn't able to come down. It's funny, I got an email just recently and it was talking about babies getting stuck, and it talked about the shoulder dystocia, and then it had another acronym. Let me pull it up right now. CPD. It says shoulder dystocia, CPD, and the physiologic factors of a baby coming through the pelvis. What if the baby gets stuck? And so I was like, well, I haven't ever heard of CPD before. And so I looked it up, and I don't feel like I have to put a label on myself, but I just thought this was really interesting that I got this email in my inbox just a few weeks ago, right after this happened. Oh no, the neighbor's dog is here. Anyway, so his birth gave me a lot of perspective on what happened. This helped me heal so much from my first C-section. I already had the scar, and my scar's better now, and they were able to clean up some of the adhesions. I don't have that sticking point on either side of my scar where I have the searing pain. Yeah, it's interesting how your mental and emotional state can really impact your physical state. So this has been an amazing postpartum, and I know a lot of that is because my husband was around more. He didn't have to go right back to work, and that was such a blessing because I really needed him. Especially like we're in this fifth wheel, the bed is really high up, I can't get off the bed off the side, so healing from a C-section, that first week I was really needing a lot more help than usual, but I actually healed up really quickly, and yeah, I'm feeling amazing. So why are you holding on to me like that? I mean, you can see he's a huge baby. I'll show some pictures maybe of his head a little bit. His head was massively swollen on one side, and so it looked like he was head down, engaged in the right position, but that his head was slightly angled. But I kind of have been exploring more about the whole pelvic hip bone shape, and I guess there's different shapes that people have, and sometimes people have a little dip in the center, and the head can hit that spot, especially if it's a little bit too big or maybe at the wrong angle. And the similarities between him and my second daughter was their head shape was a little bit bigger on top, and my two daughters that came right out had these little petite round heads, and so I think their head shape had a lot to do with why that happened. It made so much more sense once we saw his head, and I'm glad that we made the choice that we did about the C-section when we did, because his head was only going to get worse if I kept trying to push him out. If he was gonna come out, he would have came out because his head was right there at the opening. It just wasn't making it through that bone structure. For me, it's become really clear, and it's just kind of one of those things where I'm like, if we had another baby, I would definitely have to go about the planning of the birth in a different way, because obviously there's something with me where I could give birth to my baby naturally, or I could have a baby's head be too big and get stuck. I hope this birth story leaves you just with a fresh perspective, and if you've had hard birth stories before, or you have anxiety around a baby's birth story to come, that maybe this would give you a little bit of peace, knowing that it doesn't always go the way that we want it to, and sometimes we have to take advantage of the technology of this time that we live in. And it is a beautiful thing if you need that and you're able to use that. Not that it's always necessary and that we should always be falling back on that, but there are times when we might need that. Thank you guys for listening to my birth story of my first son, my fourth baby, and I will see you guys on the next video.